So we really missed you all last week. We suffered terribly in Naples, Florida, Italy. And I just want you to know that my wife and I, we are going to be submitting our expenses because, this church eats about a big bag of these every single month. And they are made in Naples, Italy. And I negotiated for 288 cases to be shipped here. So it's a business trip, right? It's a write-off, right? Isn't that what it is? Anyway, if you ever wonder where these come from, they were all over the place in Naples. It was an awful lot of fun, to say the least. Let's get into this. Let's get into this gospel because we hear it all the time, but I really want us to have a very clear understanding of the setting. So these two people are going to the temple. Jesus is talking to an audience that already goes to the temple. They're Jews, and as Jews, they're required to go to temple on a regular basis for prayer. So this is the way the temple is set up. There is an outside area just like this, and in this outside area would be allowed the Gentiles, people who are not Jews, who are just visiting, and also, sorry women, but you also were on the outside here as well. You were not allowed on the inner sanctum at all of the temple. Women, just, that's the way it sort of worked out. And also, mind you, that coming into the temple was a very public event. You would be walking in from the outside, you'd be entering into these this huge portico to come in, and so there is, the setting. Sometimes tax collectors, people, prostitutes who are sinners, would come in and they would hide themselves in this back area. Now, mind you then, this would be the Holy of Holies. In this area here would be the Ark of the Covenant, and between that entranceway and these sections here, all the way up here, there is rankings. There are rankings about the men, but the men who would be giving more money to the temple than somebody who gave less would have a closer spot. So mind you, for our Jewish brothers and sisters, this area here, this was God on earth. The Ark of the Covenant is God's literal presence on earth. So whoever gets closest to that, sort of wins type thing. And up in this area, you would have the Sadducees and the Pharisees up in this area. And then, of course, there would be other priests, and then, of course, the high priest who would stand before. No one entered the Holy of Holies except for one time a year. But this entire space is a space of worship and prayer, and it's all designated based on your value and how you are seen as valuable to the temple as a whole. Money, like I said, really determined where you were among the group of men, but then if you were a Sadducee or a Pharisee, you got better seats, and then it moved forward. The reason I say all this is if you listen to Luke, he makes it appear as though his prayer is that he is standing next to the tax collector who is right next to him, and his prayer to God is, I am so grateful I am not like this tax collector. That's not what's happened. What actually has happened is that Sadducee carried the visual of seeing the tax collector at the entranceway, hidden in with the Gentiles. He saw him there. He made his way all the way up here, and he carried the fact that that tax collector is less than I am, and I'm positioned here. In his heart, the Sadducee is already arranging his conversation with God based on the lowliness and the sinfulness of this other person, of this tax collector. From the very entranceway, the minute he saw him. Why? Because he knew that if he brought it up before God, it would make him look good. As a tax collector, I'm not that. I'm better than that. But he uses it as a positioning, as an opening, as a way to get God's attention, to make himself more righteous in God's eyes. And so starts with this whole monologue about how and who and what he is. And listen, not for anything, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. So we listen to this and immediately our reaction is, wow, this guy is really full of himself. But not according to the law. According to the law, what he is doing is absolutely correct. Okay, he says he's not greedy, dishonest, or adulterous. I guess we have to take him at his word on those. However, fasting twice a week was very common and prescribed in the Jewish scriptures. The fact that he pays tithes on his whole income. Recognize some people considered some of the income to be worthy of being tithed, and then others that was not. So he is in and of himself, according to the law, he is righteous. He is. Of course, the problem is that he compares himself to another person and puts another person down to make himself even greater, when actually all he was doing was what was prescribed of him and the other Jewish believers, how to live their life. He ends up in the front talking about this tax collector in the back, and he goes off on his tirade, and you could see him, can't you? You could see him all puffed up in his pride, in that I'm doing all of the right things. Look at me. Externally, I am doing all of the right things. And on top of that, look, I'm wearing amazing robes of a Sadducee. And here I stand, not back here with these ordinary whatevers they are, but I'm up here in my own area. I'm in my space. I am just a few priests and a high priest away from the actual presence of God. And he judges himself based on the externals. And those externals is what he considers makes him righteous, makes him worthy of being in the presence of God, makes him worthy to have that place and not this place. Now, let's be honest. You heard the story about tax collectors. You know how they were received, or weren't very well received, in this community. The two of these men approaching the temple, the Sadducee on his approach in, the Sadducee, people would be stopping, they would be bowing, they would be getting out of his way. He's a Sadducee. He's a priest. He's recognized as such. So he is being honored on his way in because of his title, because of his position. The tax collector, however, as he's approaching, everyone knows who he is. Every single person knows who he is and has already made and has a very clear decision in their head about his value. They all hate him because of what he does, because of who he works for, which is really the Romans. And so the Jews always felt that tax collectors sold out their own for the sake of working for the Romans. Now, we don't know anything about whether or not this tax collector was a typical tax collector, which during the day, if you owed Rome 2 denarii, they would add another because they would keep the extra. And there's no one to question. It's not like the IRS where you have programs, that spit out what you owe and how much you make and all that stuff. It was basically up to this tax collector to determine how much you owed. So we don't know whether or not he cheated anyone or not. We don't. But we do know that on his approach to the temple, nobody was stopping and bowing. Nobody was getting out of his way. They were all judging him with hatred. And yet, he feels it is so important to be in the presence of God in the temple that he endures all of that simply to find a small little spot off to the side. And the difference here really comes down to, where is their heart? What is the constitution and the makeup and the position of these two men's hearts? One finds himself already righteous, not having to beg God for anything, but sort of trumpeting to God everything that he has done and what he has accomplished. The tax collector is fully aware, even if he is righteous, even if he doesn't cheat anyone, that he is still very much a sinner. His heart is humbled. His heart is humbled. He doesn't even consider for a moment, even if he is a good, righteous tax collector, that he is worthy of anything from God, but begs instead for God's mercy. Begs instead for God's mercy. Because he realizes, as we should all realize, that no matter how much we try to get things right, most of the time we muff it up. We make terrible mistakes along the way. We could have the best intentions and we could still end up in a day where we look back and we see things that we said or done or thought that we really shouldn't have, but we did. And they popped into our mind and perhaps we entertained them, perhaps whatever. And the fact of the matter is that all of us should recognize that we are really no better than the tax collector. Even the whole thought here was the Sadducee felt that by going to temple in and of itself was the value that he brings to God. He is actually raising God up because he is there in the presence and because of where he is. The temple is a holy and sacred place, much like this one. But the heart of these two men is very different and distinctive. And Jesus brings it up as a parable, but I wonder whether or not it really was. He says it's a parable, meaning he's making up a story. But is it really the case? You don't have to walk very far in Naples to find a church. When you find one church, if you walk 5 minutes in any direction of that church, there's generally another church. And then when you think you've seen all the churches, there's another church. And they all comes in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are amazingly ornate. Some of them are very simple and very basic. There were 3 within a 3 to 4 minute walking distance from where we were staying. And these are not small. This would be a side chapel of some of these churches. I mean, it was just amazing. Mary Major was a significant work of art and culture, and it was just, it took your breath away when you walked in. It was so beautiful. You could sense, God's presence in that place. You could sense the generations of people who had gathered in that place and prayed there, and you immediately connected with that. St. Clair, which wasn't far from where we stayed at all, was very much like this, a very simple setting, but it was a football field. I could not throw a football and hit the other wall. There was just no way, and I was actually looking for the bus service that took you down to the front because it was quite a hike, and by the time you got there, I was hoping that they'd have refreshments, coffee, water, juice, something. I just walked all the way from over there, but no, this is just a huge... So on Sunday, we did go, from church to wander around, and their church services were very poorly attended. Not a lot of people, There'd be the priestess in the front, and I don't know, Donna, 15 people maybe, 20 people. Big, huge church, enormous church. 10 or 15 people gathered attending Mass. However, during the week, when I would stop in, you would find off to the corner, in a very quiet spot with no publicity, nobody around, not visible to anybody unless you were being nosy looking around like me. A person sitting, holding their head in prayer. As I walked into the different churches all throughout the course of the week, these three especially, I looked around for that. And there were people in tears, right, Donna? The one gentleman in front of us, there's a very famous doctor from Naples who is known for his intercession, and for through his intercession, God provides miracles. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of testimonies about this doctor. Giovanni Moscati, I think was his name. And it was just, people came there to pray for him, to pray to him, asking him to intercede on their behalf. And in this place, you would see the people gathering, and you could see just the activity of the heart. Now, as Protestants, we seem to have eliminated the fact that, the church is what it is made up of in heaven and also on earth. And in the very same way, we ask people here to pray for us in the course of a challenging time that we're going through. What is the challenge, or what is the problem we would have asking someone who is part of our church in the other world to be praying for us as well? So I think we've taken some of that to an extreme. The point, though, is even if you take out Giovanni Moscati and his people who are coming to him, you still have off to the side, the Blessed Sacrament, which is for Roman Catholics. When we gather and we pray over these elements and we receive what Jesus says are his body and his blood, for Roman Catholics, they reserve that in what's called a tabernacle. And the tabernacle, there is a red lamp that basically always is lit to indicate that the Blessed Sacrament is present there. And you would find in each one of these churches, in the course of a day, at any given time, you would find people gathered and sitting in the presence of Jesus. No fanfare, nothing. Just being there. Just being in his presence. I think Naples, and Donna and I talked about this flying home. I think Naples for us was very much, and it wasn't meant to be, it was very much a spiritual journey. Because you see, here, of course, I encounter all of you folks on a Sunday, and then there's all the people that, call and write and email and stuff, and we're really glad about that. But there's something about walking into a space and not being seen as the pastor. There's something about walking into a space and just being an ordinary guy walking in and nobody knowing who you are. And being able to sort of walk through that space without anything and recognizing and seeing and experiencing the faith of just ordinary people. And that experience, to me, is, I think, what is the foundation of the parable that Jesus is talking about. The heart of these people, especially the one person sitting off to the side here, I still see him. I still feel it. Just simply with his head in his hands, just off to the side, just praying. His heart was all about being in relationship and talking to and being in the presence of God. It was that simple. He didn't care what people thought. He didn't set himself up in the middle. It wasn't a show. He could have sat in the middle. Church is huge. 1,000 seats, knock yourself out. Why pick the one way off on the side? Because for him, it wasn't about anything other than him having some private time with Jesus. The people gathering and praying before, Dr. Moscati, you could see in their eyes, you could see in their body language, you could see in their trembling, you could see in their tears that what was driving them to ask for his intercession was faith. It's faith. And you could see the people sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament that it was all about faith. And the difference is, I think, where was their heart? Where was their heart? Obviously, our Sadducee friend found his righteousness in the externals, but his heart lacked a relationship or a connection to God. He was doing what he was told to do, but there was no depth. And yet at the same time, here was this tax collector who went through all this ridicule just to make his way in there, just so that he could ask God to have mercy on him. That's it. That's all we know that he says. Have mercy on me, a sinner. That's it. In the gym in the morning when I go, there's a bunch of guys, and the one fellow was talking about how his daughter was raised in Roman Catholic Church, but has found another church, and so very much about reading and studying the Bible, and ask my opinion, because I happen to be the only pastor in the place at that hour in the morning, and so and I said, listen, I think it's all fine and good to use the scriptures to connect, not with the scriptures for the sake of the scriptures, because that's what the Sadducee did. The Sadducee connected with the scriptures so he could figure out exactly what he needed to do, what boxes he needed to check off in order to be considered righteous. And I said to him, I would rather your daughter use the scriptures as what I believe they're meant to be, which is a tool so that you connect to the author. You connect to the author of the scriptures. That's what's important. It's the heart connection that's important. Because as long as you're trying and you're operating and functioning out of the depths of your heart to do what you can do and to do it to the best of your ability, you really can't go wrong. It's when we end up trying to manipulate and control and make a list of things we need to do in order to be on God's good side and to declare ourselves righteous that it seems to me is where we get really messed up. And so, some churches are all about Sunday attendance. And look, I'm not saying gathering as a community is a bad thing. I'm not. But it's not the end all. It does not make us righteous in God's eyes to gather as a community. We gather as a community because why? We are sinners and we are in need of God's mercy. It's not about us, doing things to sort of appease God. God's going to ask us, where was your heart? Where was your heart? This week, I'd ask us to take a look at that. In our relationship with God, why do we do what we do? Or why don't we do what we could do? Because ultimately, I don't think it's an activity of our head or our brain or our intellect. I think a relationship with God is meant to have us focus on being in relationship with Him. One last thing about the gym. So I explained to the gentleman, we use this term in the prayer, Our Father, all the time, ad nauseum. We just say it all the time. And we don't even think anymore about the words, Our Father. We don't. But for Jesus' audience, when Jesus used and declared and identified God as our Father, there was a gasp that could have been heard a mile away, because they never referred to God in a paternal, loving, providential, caring way. God was this other being. We were humans. God was there. We were here. And God was all sovereign, all righteous, all glorious, but God was totally distinctive, and God really wasn't terribly concerned about us so much. And yet Jesus' terminology in Our Father shaped and shocked everyone, and really, I believe, is the center point of his teachings, comes down to that prayer, that one opening line, Our Father. They ask him, Jesus, teach us how to pray. John the Baptist taught his disciples, you teach us how to pray, and he starts with Our Father. And I'm telling you, nobody heard anything after that because they were processing, how can you possibly be talking about God in such a providential way? Because remember, it's a patriarchal society. The father has the responsibility of the care, the welfare of the family, providing for the family. The father is everything in that culture and is the one source of everything you need is provided for by that father. And so now all of a sudden, Jesus is calling the sovereign, divine, power and authority, Our Father. Shocking, absurd. What I said to Donna was, I was talking to the one guy, John. I was just talking to him. And I realized by the time I got done, there were 8 other people gathered around me in the middle of a gymnasium listening to me talk, And I was like, okay, all right, But I do think we have to ask ourselves, are we a Sadducee or are we a tax collector? Are we fully aware of who and what we are and what we're made up of? Do we really realize that we're really just a terrible mess and that we need Jesus' death and resurrection to redeem and sustain us? But because of what Jesus has accomplished for us, we are no longer sinners. See, the tax collector, Jesus had not died or rose yet. The tax collector had to call himself a sinner. We're not sinners anymore. And I know this is, but what is the purpose of the death and the resurrection if it doesn't transform us? If it doesn't make us something other? And what is that something other? We are sons and daughters of God. We are sons and daughters of God. And yet somehow I think we're still stuck on thinking that we're just sinners. Now, this does not mean that we don't commit sin and we don't need constant grace or whatnot, but we're no longer self-identifying ourselves just as a sinner. It's the one thing about the story that bothers me most, is because this is prior to Jesus' death and resurrection. So the tax collector doesn't know any good news, about his redemption, about his salvation, about who he is and how he is seen by God because of what Jesus has accomplished. It's the sad part of the story. Not the arrogant person up in the front. Geez, we meet plenty of those people even today. None of that's shocking to us. But the tax collector doesn't realize that he's precious yet. He doesn't realize just how precious he is, and that ultimately Jesus is going to give his life and restore life through the empty tomb. This week, ask yourself, where is your heart in your relationship with God? Are we doing things and saying things and reading the Bible? Are we doing these things for the sake of the activity of them and because we believe they make us righteous in God's sight? Or is it simply enough to sit honestly, totally open, totally vulnerable to God and saying, yeah, I'm a sinner, but you loved me so much. Help me hold on to and capture and infuse in me what it is that you now call me, a son, a daughter. God bless you.